thank you very much. I'm so excited to be here with both of you today. Thank you very much for being with us, Ambassador Jovita Neliupšienė, the EU ambassador to the United States, and Ambassador Karen Kornbluh, who is Special Assistant to the President and Principal Deputy Chief Technology Officer for the White House.
Such a Washington title.
Very excited to have you both here today to talk about AI and something that's really important to me and to all of us at BSA, international cooperation between the United States and the EU. But before we kick it off, I'll ask both of you to talk just a little bit about your role broadly, and then we'll dig into AI. So I'll start with you, Jovita.
Well, first of all, I think that it's a good time for both sides of the Atlantic, because you and us, we are in the change of our administration. And yesterday it was announced who are commissioners designate, and probably those who are following European developments already know that this time we have a very specific combination, that the same commissioner who is responsible for digital policies is actually as well responsible for the security. So it's probably speaks for itself how important the file is. And I think that this European approach to their safety and the security of the technology is quite prevailing. This is what we are trying to do and trying to discuss in all the different formats with the United States, be it TTC, be it G7, be it G20, or any other international. So trying to promote our cooperation, transatlantic cooperation, because we're really the closest partner, I think.
Thanks.
Yeah, and so I just joined the White House July 29th, a little late in the administration, but I came from the German Marshall Fund of the United States, which is an organization that's really dedicated to transatlantic cooperation, and I was so excited to join the Biden administration even at this late date, because there's been this real effort to marry the opportunities of technology and seizing those opportunities with also managing any risks and not seeing those as in opposition, but that if we have clear guardrails, that we can allow for innovation and to be very open in working with stakeholders, and that one of the goals is promoting democracy and promoting citizen participation. So I think it's really exciting that the EU and the US are both focused on competitiveness and innovation and ensuring that our populations can do well from an economic perspective and feel that their government is really delivering for them. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for transatlantic cooperation and cooperation with industry as well.
All right, great. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about approaches to AI. So the EU has been thinking about AI and AI regulation for some time. In fact, on one of the earlier panels, someone said, Europe got 3 things right: food, fashion, and the EU AI Act. It's not a combination that I had heard before.
I agree. There are some other things, so we could.
And the US has been thinking about AI for quite some time, and I guess it's been almost a year, just slightly less than a year, that the Biden administration issued their executive order on AI, longest executive order in history. So I guess my question to you is, where do you see the similarities, and where do you see the differences between the US approach to AI and the European approach to AI?
Well, I think that the main thing, what is how the EU is approaching, and have been discussing that for more than 3 years, even before adopting the AI Act, was actually really making sure that we build trust. Because in order any new technology would work and will service the customers or will service the clients, is actually if it's trusted. And how you build the trust, you actually have to mitigate the risk, because of course, AI will bring huge opportunities for markets, for companies, for people, different sectors, from the health to finances to protection of people to defense. But there are a lot of risks, And I think that what it took a while for us is actually to make sure that we're basing our AI regulation on risk assessment and regulate only those which are really the riskiest, if I may put like that. So most, in the numbers, probably it's like 18 to 10%. Probably all the AI which would be regulated under stricter regulation. I think that's probably the similar approach US is following. I will leave for you to comment. But when we ever have discussions on AI in TTC, in the Trade Technology Council, it's actually you can feel that we have the similar or the same direction of travel. It's just the difference how you do that on tactical level, because we have a different legal systems. We have to consult not only businesses, which is, first of all, is developing AI, but we have 27 member states, which we will have to consult and to bring them on board in order to implement any kind of the regulation effectively. And in general, I think that one of the things is not only regulate, but to incentivize. And I'm really very much glad that we're not only creating AI related institutions or regulations, but as well have more than 43 billion euros for incentivizing AI and usage of AI. So I think that this will contribute to the competitiveness, which we actually have really to push through, as it was just announced in the Draghi's report.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar, that I think a lot of the differences really come from the different structures of government, that the EU, wrote down very clear rules that they have to do because there's a coordination across these 27 countries, whereas in the US, we have all these different federal regulatory agencies that are either sectoral or focused on different kinds of concerns, like the FTC and consumer protection, and so those are going to be focused on some of the similar things that are high risk that are in the EU AI Act. But then we're also both looking at those foundation models as a separate category. But I think from a principles basis, and not wanting to, certainly from the US point of view, not wanting to prejudge, except when it comes to these existential risks with the foundation models where there's going to be some testing. The idea is, that we want this innovation, but we want some clearer guardrails. And I think one of the things that's really interesting that a lot of people have been talking about is there's a lot of current law already on the books, and figuring out how that applies to the new technology is sort of the challenge. So we are talking about something completely new, completely different, completely new opportunities, new risks, but we already have a lot of law out there. And so just figuring out how to update it or how to apply it, I think is a big part of the challenge.
So one of the differences in our structure is, in the European Union, it's a union of member states. And so when you pass a law like the EU AI Act, there's been a very robust process of talking to the member states about that. And there's, the council process that it goes through. And right now, the next step, now that the EU AI Act has been passed, is for it to be implemented in the various member states of the European Union. But the idea, at a high level, is that once it's passed, it is then the law of the European Union. It may be implemented slightly differently in different member states, but in essence, it's the idea of harmonizing the law, or at least that is a way to describe it than used to describe it. But in the United States, we have a federal system, and then we have the states. And in fact,
we do have states.
Yes, we do have states. And Senator Maroney of Connecticut, who has been very influential in AI legislation, was just on the stage and still in the back of the room. And so we have a different structure where you can have a federal law, but you can also have various states passing various laws. So first of all, Ambassador Jovita, I'd be interested in your view of how I describe the European Union. Is that correct? And then Ambassador Kornbluh, Karen, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on how to manage what is sometimes what is both a benefit and a challenge to the U.S. system.
Yes, indeed. I think that when we are speaking about any kind of the EU law, we want to harmonize certain rules and to leave their implementation for the member states. It's not all, it depends on the regulation how deep we go into their saying for the member states or precluding what they have to do. But I think that it's a general approach and is written quite clearly in this regulation that only the riskiest models have to follow through certain rules. So in the certain sectors, I'm sure I don't need to preach here in this public that if we speak about medical or health AI, which is working in the medical or health sector, that is one of the riskiest, but as well as finances and so on and so forth. So it's this similar approach will be, then it goes down to the member states. If it's in the breach, who will follow? Will it be the prosecutor's office or the police office? It then depends on the member states who will actually follow through, what kind of the national agencies they have, or they will give those roles for the national agencies to apply the law. That in a way makes our life a little bit more easier probably than here, but let's see, because it's the agency is still in the making. We will hire more than 100 people, experts actually, to work with the algorithms and to understand those. It's it's not the case that even European Commission having more than 30,000 employees is able to do that, because we have been doing that before.
Yeah, so obviously we have a federal system, and it's just, I think there's a tradition of saying that the states are the innovators, the laboratories of democracy, and we'll see what works in different states, and then often the federal government will come in either to raise the bar if some states have set it too low, or to set a common standard. Often California, for instance, will set a very high bar. What's interesting, I think, is that in our new international environment, where it's always been complicated for companies that operate nationally, because how do we comply with one state without applying that for the whole country, and then one state becomes the de facto law setter for the whole country. But now globally, we have different countries acting as laboratories. So now we're seeing what the EU is going to do, and that may influence what the US does. And we're already seeing companies that operate in the US doing some things to comply with the EU Act, and that may give folks ideas over here. But it's complicated. It's really complicated for these multinational companies that are running very quickly. And so there's a real dialogue. But I think, we have the federal system, and we haven't passed a national law. So I think it'll be really, really, really interesting to see what's happening. It's a very lively debate.
For those who don't know, this is not Karen's first stint in public service. She also served as ambassador to the OECD in the Obama administration. So I want to ask a question about outside stakeholder, about the OECD, and then about the EU more generally. So the OECD has been very active in AI policy, as you know, including releasing principles on AI, which have been widely adopted and very influential. And one of the resources that the OECD has, one of the tools that it has, is this network of experts, where it brings in outside expertise, including from the private sector. So I'd be interested in you talking a little bit about that network of experts and how you believe governments and organizations can best use outside perspectives when they're developing policy.
Yeah, it's such an important question, especially when it comes to technology and innovation. And we have a tech talent crunch in the U.S. government, and so we've at OSTP have been really involved in a tech talent spurt to try to get more folks into the federal government that have tech talent. But also we just need to get on the ground real information from experts, industry, civil society. So the OECD wasn't always great at that, and it's really learned to become good at it. And this expert group is a great example, and they were out there ahead of time, I think because countries were asking them for that kind of expertise. And so they built it up, and they really were ahead of the curve in terms of some definitions that we all needed, some categories, just ways of thinking about it, spurring dialogue, just as they've been doing in the data space, which is closely related. So I think that's really, really important. And in the US government, we've also had this National AI Advisory Council, and that you serve on, that's been incredible.
Miriam was just here, she chairs the entire NIAC committee.
Yeah,
so,
which is another important venue for getting outside input as well. But that it's absolutely critical. And I always said when I was ambassador to the OECD, you know, we would be creating this organization, you know, if it didn't exist, because we need this kind of multilateral, but it tries to be more and more multi-stakeholder organization to help us, you know, think through these very nitty-gritty issues of regulation and law in all different sectors, not mostly AI, but they've really stepped into the AI challenge.
That's great. Jovita, the EU has a long history of multi-stakeholder engagement, so.
Yeah, so I think that one of the things is when we speak about AI regulation, AI Act, or any other digital regulation, probably the ESA regulations where we spend, or European Commission spend most of the time actually trying to coordinate, to include, and to discuss with the multiple stakeholders. You know, AI Pact got an interest of more than 1,000 companies. 100 already signed. It will be publicly announced in end of September next week. Actually, I really agree. If we don't do that, probably the process would invent itself, because this is really a high demand. Another element I think we have not to forget, it's not only us, like EU, US, who are interested in developing safe, trustworthy, and secure AI, because 122 countries actually signed UN resolution. I think that's a big deal, actually. Yeah, we can discuss the nitty-gritties, as you say, like, you know, if it's enough, if it's like really deep enough, but I think it goes to the direction we want to travel, and, you know, we can work on that, but actually it shows how much a whole international community is craving for their general approach, a general framework.
I completely agree. I want to come back to that, actually. You mentioned the EU-US Trade and Technology Council. It's, I think, this month that it was launched, or at least it had its first sort of official meeting 3 years ago. So it'd be interesting, and it seems like it has been a good tool in terms of improving cooperation, both sort of the formal conversations in the room and then informal conversations that are happening outside of it. What are your views on it? What would you have it do next?
Well, I think that it's a really extremely useful tool, and especially on this, because it's trade and technology. So I can tell that in my personal view is the technology part was extremely successful. It's not only that we signed a lot of multiple MOUs on their agency-to-agency cooperation, especially on AI, on quantum, on other technologies. But, you know, it's only in this public you can tell, like, you know, we were discussing, like, for almost 2 years definition of certain concepts, and I cannot write even the press release about that, because it's impossible to explain people. So what have you been doing for a year and a half? Like, discussing definitions, like, I think that, you know, but this is, those who work in this field, they do really get it. What does it mean, actually, to get an agreement on definitions on AI, or, you know, on the legacy chips, or stuff like that? I think that's really where it was spending the time. I would, you know, I think that, you know, you can always go back and say, okay, we can do more, or we can do different. But I think that it's important to put experts together, not only political level, but really expert level discussions. And one of the things we had, for example, in green technologies, but maybe it could be done in this the same format, is like really involving more stakeholders and businesses in those discussions. And on green technologies, we had a hosted event in January this year. The people coming up with the very concrete ideas what to do, and actually we can. Then it's much more easier for us to kind of take it and okay, let's work on this, because I would wish all the public service people would be as brilliant as you, but probably it will take some time before that.
I thought one of the things I thought sitting next to you, I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking when we worked together in the Obama administration, tech was kind of like a boutique issue. There were a few of us, in the margins who were dedicated, really cared about it, and it's really moved to the center. And the fact that we're talking about trade and technology, and those are the two big issues, and that's a centerpiece of the discussions we're having between the Europe and the US, is really, really interesting and so important and so needed. Similarly, I think sometimes the conversation between two countries on economic issues gets really narrow in terms of trade agreements and tariffs. And this allowed us to have a richer conversation. And the thing in the future, I think especially given the Draghi report and the emphasis that the US has had on industrial policy, more of a conversation on competitiveness and job creation and innovation, I think would be wonderful.
Okay. Let's talk about a little bit spreading outside the United States and the EU. So there has been a lot of international work on AI. We already talked about the OECD. It's been very active at the G7. There have been a number of summits. There's Bletchley Park, South Korea. France is planning its summit coming up. And in fact, the UN has their Summit of the Future coming up. And then I think just this morning, Secretary Blinken and Secretary Raimondo announced that there's going to be a convening of international AI safety institutes in San Francisco in mid-November. So there is a lot of, I think this is an issue where there's a lot of the international community that wants to come together and work on it. That said, I think there are concerns that emerging economies are not as much a part of those conversations as they could be. And speaking for a moment in my role, right now I'm chairing the International Cooperation Working Group of the President's AI Advisory Committee. And we issued a recommendation to the administration that they be very proactive in reaching out to emerging economies, because their perspectives and their needs are so important. And if they're not included in these discussions, they're not going to see the benefits of AI the way they should, and we won't, the other economies won't get the benefit of their perspective. So I just would be interested in hearing both of your thoughts on that, on bringing emerging economies in, and what more we can do to ensure that happens.
Well, as I mentioned, UN process actually showed that how much is needed, and 122 countries. It's a bit of some of them are definitely developing countries, and I think it's AI will have in any way will have a global impact. So I think that's kind of the interest comes from that direction, and I think that. The same as with other digital technologies, we can be proud that some of the now most outstanding companies in AI are actually in the US and a tiny bit in the EU. But you never know with the digital. This is the beauty of the digital technologies, that it can actually pop up anywhere. That's why I think that. In general, AI code of conduct, the processes like AI code of conduct of developers is extremely important. This could be one of the tools which I think we have to use, and whenever. The trade is not off the table. Trade deals in Europe is not off the table. But when we are discussing more and more, technology is actually part of those deals. So I think that proactive action is always. You're right in advising U.S. government. I take that as well as a good advice.
Yeah, and that's why I think this announcement is so important, that we expand the circle of folks who are talking about. AI safety, and even if they don't have their own safety institute, are benefiting from the technical assistance, either directly from the countries that are doing it or through intermediary organizations like the OECD, but that they can be assured that what they're using they can trust. And I think in the early days of social media, and still to this day, some countries try to control technology top down because they're not convinced of its safety. And so I think if we can pave that way with some real great work on the technical aspects of safety, I think that's going to be really, really important.
I agree. Jovita, you mentioned code of conduct. We kicked things off today with Aidan Gomez, as the CEO of Cohere. We were talking a little bit about voluntary commitments, including those that the White House issued. Karen, can you talk a little bit about voluntary commitments?
Yes. So last week, for the anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act, a number of model developers agreed to some voluntary commitments on image-based sexual abuse. And we were really, really gratified to see this, because we're really getting, these companies are, as you know, they're developing their models, they're growing them, they're developing their policies, they're just hiring their shops up. And so to get them, as they're building their processes, to build in safeguards against outputting these kinds of non-consensual intimate images, AI generated, but also the inputs, that they won't be training on them. And so they made up three commitments, and the president was able to announce that in addition to the other commitments around it was a really moving, I have to say, it was a really moving event around the 30th anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act. And this was a small part of it, but it was these are really, I think we tend to, or I don't, I'm sure you all don't, but it's easy to not take seriously how damaging these images can be, whether you're a young girl, an LGBTQ plus person, a woman in the public eye, who's suddenly these synthetic images of you are being circulated with, intimate images that you did not want to share with the public. It can be incredibly, incredibly damaging. So we were really gratified that they were willing to make voluntary commitments.
Well, I always believe in the voluntary commitment, but not everybody. Yes. I think that it would be good that everybody would commit voluntary, but it's not always the case. So, in general, like next to the AI Act, we of course have a Digital Service Act, which deals with the issues, and really, I think that the idea or the concept of Digital Service Act is not only transparency, the trustworthiness, and making sure that illegal content, what is illegal offline, is made illegal online, but as well sharing responsibility with the companies, because nobody wants to have a ministry of truth or saying, from the government that now we say you have to remove that content, because the content moderation is extremely sensitive topic. So I think that the only way how you do that is actually building that trustworthy relations between consumer on one hand and developer on the other hand. And one of the one of the consequences, if you wish, of the DCA is that out of 25 dedicated platforms which has a certain obligations to develop due diligence process and to develop certain algorithms to remove harmful content, actually almost 1/3 is porno sites. So it's not that something is something comes from the top of the one commissioners or the European Union head. It's actually the content which can be harmful for minors, it can be harmful for youngsters, it can be harmful for certain groups of the society. And we have to work hand in hand, because none of the government and none company separately can deal with that. It's only when we work together. And hopefully we don't need those negative incentives. Hopefully it will work, but to be sure, because the longer the illegal content is online, the more harmful it is.
Well, one of the things I was going to ask is what would be helpful for the U.S. and the EU to be working on together more cooperatively, and I think that is a great area. We are almost at time, so I'm going to ask one last question to both of you. Obviously, the discussion today is focused on AI, and U.S. and EU have made AI an enormous priority. But looking ahead, is there any other technology or technology issue that's sort of top of mind when you think about maintaining economic leadership around the world?
Why don't you go first?
I think quantum will be the technology here, and if we maintain leadership here, I think that we will much ahead of the rest.
Karen,
Yeah.
Melissa is the principal
trying to
deputy
remember what I was
chief
thinking.
technology officer of the White House.
I do think that we do have to focus on these issues like image-based sexual abuse, on kids' issues. I think these are really important. But AI is a lot more than a foundation model. It's the deployment throughout the economy and the productivity increases that may come with that and the learning that comes with that. And so I think that's going to present a whole host of opportunities in terms of increasing productivity, a whole host of issues having to do with the workforce and training. One of the things that we're doing as a result of the longest executive order ever written is looking at the U.S. government's use of AI and procurement. And the U.S. government is a huge force in the economy in terms of purchasing, and and a really important one in terms of setting an example as well. So I think that, to me, that's going to be really interesting, is how is the U.S. government implementing AI, and what kinds of government mechanisms, but also just how is it helping, what are the hiccups, and the workforce, as I was saying before, the tech talent workforce in the government is an enormous challenge.
I remember you remind me one more thing. I think what we can work together is actually how we unlock all non-personal data, and because right now we are using like maybe 20%, if not less, of the data which is accumulated, and I think that this is one of the things where the governments have to work to make sure. I had a very nice example where, if you put all the iPads we have in the world, it will make not like to the moon, but like 5 times to the moon if you put one on one. So we're using only one of those columns. The 4 of that should be employed as well.
And now I remember the one I was supposed to mention.
Now we start the discussion.
Which is the research side of it. So there's a national AI research resource that there's a bill in Congress that would fund it, and that's just incredibly important that our researchers have access, so that they can not only do the safety research but train our future workforce, and just be using it for the other kinds of research that universities do.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Ambassador, for being with us today. I feel very optimistic about U.S.-EU cooperation coming out of this, and it sounds like we have a significant agenda. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
For both of
Thank you.
being with us.